International Workshop Revisiting Modernist and Tropical, Pragmatic Approaches to Built Environment Designs, Lessons for Integrated Climate-Controlled Vernacular Landscapes of the Future. Session 3. Reframing Modernism, Post-Colonial Narratives and Regional Identities. Good evening. Our paper is titled, Contested Urbanism, Colonial and Post-Colonial Planning Paradigms in Dhaka's Spatial Evolution. Dhaka, the capital of Bangladesh, is a mega-city with all associated ills where no plan worked. Despite a shrouded obscurity, the town is at least 1,000 years old. It has uniquely been a capital in 4 different periods under the Mughals, the British, Pakistan, and now Bangladesh. Thus, Dhaka has grown in different ways under different regimes, where respective socio-cultural, political, and economic contexts have influenced the city's form and development. It is one of the earliest South Asian cities that had some planning more than a century ago, and other large-scale planning exercises were undertaken subsequently. Unfortunately, due to many reasons, it was never possible to implement a major part of these plans. Thus, in a sense, the city with huge potential has remained incomplete. Dhaka's urban history is not a seamless tale of organic growth or linear modernization, but a contested chronicle of conquest, control, and contradiction. As a megacity of over 20 million, Dhaka today stands atop layers of imperial ambitions, colonial neglect, post-colonial experiments, and neoliberal distortions, each phase shaped by planning interventions that entrenched elite dominance over equitable urbanism. Far from neutral, these interventions reflect the political economies of their time, defined by who wielded power, who reaped the benefits, and who was marginalized. Mughal urbanism in Dhaka enacted what Prakash terms imperial urbicide, the erasure of local power structures through spatial reconstruction. Excavations at Lalbagh show Mughal buildings atop demolished Bengali ones, asserting imperial dominance according to Mawla. This reflects broader cultural impositions, as Persian models like the Chehabad and hierarchical layouts were imposed on Bengal's riverine terrain, often with ecological consequences according to Niloufar. Dhaka's economy was restructured into an extractive urban metabolism, as Chowdhury stated, with 60–75% of its revenue diverted to imperial centers according to Rahman. The muslin industry, while celebrated, relied on proto-industrial exploitation. Archaeological evidence reveals overcrowded, high-mortality conditions for weavers according to Mukherjee. Gendered spatial control also marked Mughal urbanization, as Chatterjee notes. This patriarchal reconfiguration marginalized women despite their central role in textile labor. Urban planning increasingly enforced purdah through architectural segregation, limiting women's access to public and economic life according to Hossain and Begum. British colonial rule after 1757 relegated Dhaka to a peripheral node until the 1864 Dhaka municipality formalized governance, introducing taxes and sanitation boards, but planning served colonial extraction according to Afzal. The 1917 Geddes Plan, rooted in conservative surgery, proposed incremental improvements, emphasizing environmental harmony, with supporters praising its sensitivity according to Geddes himself. Yet, its top-down approach ignored local knowledge, treating Dhaka as a colonial experiment, and archival records show limited implementation as funds favored Calcutta, as the Bengal Gazetteer of 1908 stated. Colonial urbanism in Dhaka exemplified what King identifies as colonial urban dualism, producing segregated spaces that materialized racial hierarchies while facilitating economic extraction. Newly uncovered correspondence between Calcutta and London reveals that British urban interventions in Dhaka were explicitly designed to manage indigenous populations while minimizing administrative costs. The 1864 Municipal Act, often portrayed as administrative modernization, functioned primarily as a mechanism to shift infrastructure costs to local taxpayers, while maintaining European control over spending priorities. Analysis of municipal budgets from 1870 and 1920 demonstrates that over 60% of expenditures benefited European enclaves representing less than 2% of the population, institutionalizing what Chattox terms infrastructural racism. Geddes' diagnosis of Dhaka's problems reflected colonial preoccupations with order, hygiene, and efficiency rather than indigenous conceptions of urban functionality. Environmental historian Ghosh demonstrates that Geddes' ecological sensibilities were selectively applied, prioritizing aesthetic considerations in European areas while viewing indigenous adaptations to Bengal's hydrology as obstacles to modernization. The limited implementation of the plan resulted not merely from funding shortages, but from what Richardson identifies as strategic neglect, a deliberate policy of minimal intervention in native quarters to maintain social distance while extracting revenue. Colonial policies fundamentally restructured Dhaka's class composition, producing a new Bhadralok, respectable class, emerged as urban intermediaries whose socio-spatial practices reflected what Chattox terms colonial mimicry, adopting European concepts of urban propriety while maintaining distinctly Bengali cultural identities. This created complex patterns of neighborhood development, where Western urban forms were selectively appropriated and transformed through local cultural logics, as Sen observed. Census data from 1881 and 1931 reveals increasing residential segregation not only between Europeans and Indians but among different Indian communities, as colonial classifications hardened previously fluid social boundaries. Post-1947, as East Pakistan's capital, Dhaka faced rapid urbanization amid political marginalization. The 1959 master plan by Minopriyo, Spencelli, and Macfarlane embraced modernist zoning, envisioning elite enclaves like Gulshan, with defenders arguing it sought order. Yet, its Western bias ignored mass migration and Bengali identity, favoring West Pakistani elites, and industrial zones like Tejgan spurred growth without worker housing, spawning slums. Ethnic tensions, evident in language protests, underscored planning's disconnect, culminating in the 1971 Liberation War. Critically, the plan was less a vision than an imposition, exacerbated by funding shortages, not just intent. The plan's collapse under population pressures exposed modernism's limits, when divorced from context, deepening social divides. The 1959 Dhaka Plan exemplified what Scott identifies as high modernist ideology, faith in technocratic planning that sidelined local knowledge. Compared to Karachi and Islamabad, East Pakistan received what Yiftashal terms ethnocratic planning, allocating better housing to non-Bengali residents. During the Pakistani period, Dhaka housed 31% of Pakistan's urban population, but received only 23% of urban development funds. This led to what Graham and Marvin call splintered urbanism, modern infrastructure serving elite zones, while much of the city lacked basic services. Housing reinforced social divisions. Planned areas like Dhanmondi institutionalized Mabins, segregation by design. Bengali civil servants received 40% less housing space than West Pakistani counterparts. Industrial expansion in Tejgan lacked worker housing, echoing Davis' Planet of Slums dynamic. Since independence, Dhaka's rapid growth has outpaced planning, marked by cycles of ambition and inaction. Early efforts like the 1981 Integrated Urban Development Project, IUDP, and the 1995 Dhaka Metropolitan Development Plan aim to manage growth and protect floodplains, but weak enforcement enabled developers to override zoning, turning wetlands into sprawl. The 2016 to 2035 Detailed Area Plan, while framed as strategic and participatory, reflects neoliberal urbanism, public-private partnerships favoring profit over equity. Luxury towers rise over slums that house 40% of the population. Slums, characterized by Roy's insurgent urbanism, develop community infrastructure but remain precarious. Gender and ethnic exclusions persist, women face mobility barriers, and Biharis endure systemic stigma. Environmental degradation like Bay Ganga pollution underscores governance failures. Post-1971, Dhaka adopted privatization accelerating after the 1980s structural adjustments. The IUDP illustrates Ferguson's anti-politics machine, using technical framings to mask power dynamics. Cost recovery mechanisms initiated, marketization without privatization, shifting urban services into quasi-market forms. The DMDP revealed a gap between planning ideals and implementation. From 1995 to 2015, 78% of major projects violated official guidelines, indicating regulatory capture. Satellite data shows 57% of designated water bodies were filled for development. The DAP exemplifies SAGE's neoliberal planning paradox, inclusive rhetoric masking elite dominance. Only 5% of participants in public hearings came from low-income groups, who form nearly 40% of the population. Strategic flexibility largely served neoliberal spatial fixes, displacing costs onto the urban poor. Real estate trends produce vertical sprawl. 65% of new formal housing 2010 to 2020 targeted the wealthiest 15%. This results in enclave urbanism, while informal settlements expand through people as infrastructure, networks sustaining life beyond formal systems. Dhaka's environmental crises reveal slow violence and environmental racism. Buri Ganges pollution, worsening since 1980s, disproportionately affects marginalized communities, who also face the greatest climate risk. These patterns underscore planning's failure to reconcile growth with justice. Dhaka's urban evolution reveals not a lack of planning but a trend of exclusionary schemes, from Mughal extraction, British segregation, Pakistani alienation, and Bangladeshi cronyism. Each phase deepens spatial and social divides, reflecting deliberate choices by emperors, colonizers, planners, or developers to privilege elites over the public. Yet, these were not unopposed. Vernacular and insurgent urbanisms demonstrate resilience, nuanced by gender, religion, and ethnicity. The persistence of vernacular and insurgent urbanisms in Dhaka reflects grassroots practices that sustain communities excluded from formal systems. These parallel forms of urbanism provide valuable lessons for rethinking planning. Community-led initiatives in water, waste, and mutual aid embody context-sensitive approaches that challenge one-size-fits-all models. Incorporating such knowledge into formal planning can move beyond token participation toward recognizing community expertise as central to urban development. Dhaka's climate vulnerability adds urgency to this shift. Sea level rise, flooding, and extreme heat will disproportionately affect already marginalized populations. Conventional, technocratic planning, anchored in existing political economic structures, falls short of addressing these systemic risks. Ultimately, Dhaka's planning history demonstrates that urban futures are not predetermined by technical inevitabilities, but shaped by political choices. The city's extraordinary population growth, projected to reach 28 million by 2035, will occur regardless of planning interventions, but how this growth manifests spatially remains contestable. As Roy argues, informality is not planning's failure but its product, suggesting that more equitable futures require fundamentally rethinking planning's purpose, process, and power relations. This critical history suggests that Dhaka's most promising urban futures may emerge not from comprehensive master plans but from strategic interventions that amplify existing community resilience while challenging structural inequities that have persisted across seemingly disparate planning regimes. Thank you.